if you have $1 million opportunity, are you going to give it to a rep who's never done $1 million deal, or are you going to give it to somebody who's closed 5 of those in the last year?
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Revenue Insights. I'm delighted to be joined today by Ron Gupta. He is the Chief Revenue Officer at EvolutionIQ. We're going to be diving into today into his experiences that got him into that role and some of the challenges that he's faced during that time. So, Ron, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Guy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's jump in. Perhaps you could, for our audience, you could give us a bit of a background as to kind of what got you into this role as Chief Revenue Officer.
Sure. Yeah. So I started my career in consulting, right? So I've always been a technology player. I was on the strategy side of technology initially in a consulting role. And the early part of my career was consulting, and then a natural extension into selling software that we were consulting around. So Pegasystems was the first company that I actually went and sold software for. And then, if you take my career in thirds, the first third of it was essentially very large organizations selling transformative solutions, very large ticket sizes. The second part was more in the SaaS space, learning more about, a little bit more about velocity. And then the third piece is kind of putting all of that together, right? So that's where I am. And now I'm typically working in growth stage companies. The last 10, 12 years of my life, these are either VC backed or PE backed companies that are well past the product market fit, and they're solving some interesting complexity kind of questions, whether that's spanning into new geographies, launching new products. It's all about figuring out the go-to-market model. That's kind of where I focused in on the last third of my career, and that's honestly been the most fun part of it.
I saw that you spent 3 years at Conga, and that business has kind of been a bit of a rocket ship. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So I actually came into Conga through an acquisition. So I joined a company called Aptus, who actually bought Conga, but somehow took the Conga name, right? So it was kind of a weird one that's the only time I've had that happen in my career. But Aptus was also a humongous rocket ship. They started out being an ISV for Salesforce. And I think the first part of Aptus' success, getting to like 100 million-ish, was essentially on the coattails of Salesforce's growth, right? So a lot of the selling was done to Salesforce salespeople, and then we were really playing the ISV angle. We were one of the first on the marketplace, and we scaled really, really fast. After that, what wound up happening was at some point, Salesforce bought some technology. They're like, now they're a one-shop-fits-all kind of approach with how they go after the market. So they wound up buying some technology that was actually competing with what we were selling, right? So we went from being really good friends to being kind of frenemies. They were still a customer of ours. We're still doing a lot of work together. So the point that I joined Aptus right before the Conga acquisition, the challenge that we were trying to solve at that point was, how do we create that ethos of being able to go out and sell to the market directly without necessarily having the pull through of a brand like Salesforce. And we did that pretty darn well, right? So we scaled significantly since then as well. I went through a lot of very major shifts, very many major shifts. So when I started, it was Aptus. Then Aptus got bought by Thoma Bravo and was a private equity company acquisition. Then we bought Conga, integrated Conga, and took over the Conga brand. And Conga, again, had like one product that was similar to ours, and then a couple of others that were very, very different. So it was very interesting because at the end of the day, we could kind of go to the market and solve very many different needs, which is, I think, what's making Conga continue to thrive today.
And so you left that business and took on your first Chief Revenue Officer role. So tell us a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? When you're focused on sales, it feels like it's a really, really tough job because you're opening a lot of new doors every day, and having a lot of doors shut in your face as well, right? So it's a lot of ups and downs in sales. But when you start looking at the entire go-to-market motion, there is another whole level of complexity, right? So if you think selling is tough, selling and then keeping your customers happy is equally tough, and sometimes even tougher, right? Because when you're in sales, typically you can close the door and move on to the next challenge, right? When you're taking on a revenue challenge, your focus is not just on ARR or contractual ARR, CAR, whichever your measure is, but a huge measure is on not net dollar retention, NRR, and so your focus kind of starts shifting. That was my first exposure to that. I'd run marketing before in some abstraction, at least if not directly. I was a major stakeholder in every company I've been in. But running the customer success organization was somewhat new to me. So when I came in, the first challenge that I solved was around sales. So sales efficiency. Again, this was a company that was kind of in its growth phase. It had gone and already proved itself out in the market. So the question was, could they scale effectively and efficiently, right? So I tried to solve that first. The first part was that. And actually I had a colleague who was running customer growth separate from me, right? And then later on, I think it was roughly year 2, I took over the customer success function. And that to me was a huge learning curve for me, right? Because the motion is different, the stakeholder engagement is different. And ultimately, I felt like growth is such a key tenet of any software company's long-term success, that it was a great learning experience for me.
And the product itself was servicing the customer success persona, is that right?
So the product they call it customer experience automation, which is kind of a marketing term, but essentially what they did was they tried to take the friction out of customer journeys. So we would sell to large regulated companies, who would then use this to engage their members or their customers, whoever it's B2B to C, whoever the C was in their equation.
Yeah.
And it allowed them to do things in a web-driven way that would traditionally have required someone at the other end of a phone line manning a conversation, right? And the reason it succeeded in the regulated markets was because it provided a container essentially to be able to pull in data sources that are extremely personalized. So, when we think about healthcare, financial services, a lot of information is personal information, the PHI, PII. So Ushur provided a container which would allow you to kind of transact in that information. And then a lot of AI that was layered in natively that kind of interpreted the information as well, like we kind of abstract from it and do workflows. So it was very holistic from a solution perspective, but regulated markets were the key focus.
And it sounds like your first step into AI was earlier than most of us, right? So most of us only really got into AI kind of over the last year or two, but it sounds like you were really diving into early.
Yeah. So even when I joined Ushur, we always called it AI-powered customer experience automation. And this was well before the ChatGPT buzz days, right? And honestly, I think a large part of Ushur's, at least AI, and actually even EvolutionIQ, a lot of what we do in AI is not really LLMs, because I think LLMs helps you consume mass information in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to do predictive things and analytical things, that's not really an LLM play. It's more machine learning, predictive analytics, all of that stuff. So that was also Ushur's secret sauce, right? So that's what they were focusing a lot on. That's not to say that they didn't use the LLM abstraction piece, but that was a very narrow use case versus the more extensive play they had with the rest of the AI portfolio.
Yeah, I was going to say, we at Ebsta, we've been scoring relationships as kind of the cornerstone of our proposition. So underlying kind of all the cool revenue intelligence dashboards and helping reps hit quota faster. We had to start by doing this really kind of difficult, boring piece of fixing the dirty data. And as part of that exercise, we score every relationship the business has out of 100 to help them understand, is that relationship trending up or down? And we actually at the early days, we stepped away from calling it AI because it's just purely machine learning.
Right.
And now today we call it our AI bot that goes and fixes Salesforce data. So it's amazing how the market's evolved over time.
I think it's an acceptance piece, right, Guy? Because initially the reason you probably didn't say AI is because there was a natural apprehension. Every time you mentioned AI, people were like, oh, I'm not sure I can do AI. I don't know where my data's going. And now there is a better understanding of it. I think ChatGPT unleashed a lot of very dangerous things, but it also kind of empowered a lot of organizations and made them kind of introspect and figure out how they want to support that, right? Because ultimately it's a growth engine. And now when I'm talking to companies, they're much more receptive to AI. Most of them actually have committees that have formulated protocols and policies on bringing on AI. They have guide rules for that. So it's not the Wild West days anymore. So people are much more comfortable with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we've only introduced our own generative AI features in the last 6 months, or 9 months, I suppose. So we've now got a plugin for kind of call recording. So you can use her own, or you might use a Zoom or a Gong.
Sure.
We don't really care who records your calls. We're interested in taking the call recordings, and we turn them into transcripts, and then the AI answers questions like what objections were raised on the call, or was pricing coming up often, or what competitors came up. And in fact, one of the latest features was auto populating things like Medic or MedPick, so whatever qualification methodology they've got. And we've recently introduced a score now, so the rep now gets a kind of a green thumbs up or a red thumbs down if they qualify the customer well enough to lead discovery. So again, it's kind of using AI to take away the burden from the stuff that frankly salespeople are not very good at anyway. And allowing the AI to do that much more consistently. So then you've got insights and you can kind of drive that.
I think that's kind of the human in the loop AI is kind of the way I think about it, right? Because like what you're doing is taking away some of the mundane things so people can focus more on the more intrinsically human elements. And I think that's kind of the best applications of AI that I've seen are that, right? Because everything else you talked about, summarization, that kind of stuff has been democratized now, right? So it's pretty easily available. I mean, you can get like, two 15-year-olds in a garage and they can code something that's going to look pretty darn impressive, right? It's about how do you unleash that and enable people to use the human aspect in combination and conjunction of what you're kind of doing with the chat GPT-ish, LLM-ish capabilities. That's where the value proposition sits.
Oh, great. And so then you moved on to EvolutionIQ. So tell us a bit about that business and kind of how that's engaging with AI now as well.
Yeah. EvolutionIQ is an amazing company. So they started 5 years ago and have done incredibly well. So their focus is very, very narrow. So they're solving a very narrow problem in AI. And I think that's how AI works best, is when you are very focused, because you need to understand the context, the lexicon of the problem you're solving, because you can't generally solve AI. Like you could if you're doing some mass consumption stuff, but if you want to drive significant value, you can't, because you need to understand the space. So we are focused on insurance, in bodily injuries, and in claims. So extremely, extremely narrow ICP. Started in disability, right? So if you think about insurance as property and casualty, as life and annuity, so in the disability space, we have about 70% of the top 20 carriers today in 5 years. And we run meaningful parts of the business. These are not like, small pilots going on. Like these are like meaningful business capacity that we're driving for these companies. Yeah. One of the companies that I work with, one of the executives said, like the most impressive thing that I've heard anybody saying to me from a company that I worked in is like, you are changing the industry. It's the way so we drive immense value. And that value sometimes the companies wind up using in terms of putting back as savings to their members, or changing the way these are all public companies, so they'll go out and quote about the benefits they're having from our business. So we started in disability and we own like 70-80% of that market today. Then they moved the body problem. The human body doesn't change very much between disability and workers' comp. So we've taken over that space. And then there's some other lines where what we bring to bear, which is helping people recover faster using the interventions that insurance companies have to get their members healthier faster post-injury. And everybody wins when that happens. So it's karmically like one of the best opportunities that I've been a part of, right? Because the member is happy, they're getting back to their daily lives faster, they're going, they're being productive members of society, they're going to go get their raises and the bonuses and all of that stuff. But for the companies as well, not only is it really good because you're getting people healthy faster, but actually it kind of helps significantly in the bottom line because it contributes towards indemnity. So you can save a lot of your reserves, which kind of is financially beneficial to the insurance companies as well. So it's a win-win proposition.
Amazing. And so your customers are all in the US?
No, we have customers in Canada. We have customers in continental Europe, and we're just starting to expand into Australia and other parts of Europe as well. So predominantly the English-speaking population, and then a little bit of DACH, so German, right? So that's the initial market. I do think we have aspirations of being a completely global brand, but again, focus is a really key part of our tenet, not just in our solution, but also in our go-to-market. So we're starting there.
And so tell us a bit about the growth that you've experienced during your time there. So you've been with the business really just for 6 months, but have you got, what have you done in that initial 6 month period? Is there a kind of a focus on aligning the teams again, or getting ready for the next phase of growth? What's the focus for you?
Yeah, it's two things. It's one is getting ready for the next phase of growth. I think that's the most critical part. I mean, this is I was the first chief revenue officer they brought in.
Right.
We have 3 amazing founders, and we had a couple of C-suite folks who had been with the company for a while and had grown with the company, and they're amazing individuals as well. But this was the first C-suite hire that went out for. And the reason for that is they're at the stage. So EvolutionIQ, we are at the stage now where we have to focus on things like increasing our TAM, moving into new geographies, figuring out the best ways to launch new products. So a lot of that requires coordination and planning that you can't just run with a sales team. It needs more, process, organisms, and tooling to be put in place. So that's kind of my core function. So, I mean, the great news is the company was already growing. I mean, we did, we had 200% plus NRR last year, and we grew at over 100%. So we're growing at a pretty nice clip. We're very healthy. We're touching distance from like a unicorn status. So it's like all great. So it wasn't so much like something's broken, fix it. It's more about like we are kind of entering the next frontier of growth. Let's plan for that and help orchestrate it. So that was kind of my core function. So part of that was measuring and orchestrating and figuring out what new engines we need for that growth. Part of it was figuring out the manpower quotient of it, because I read Jim Collins' Good to Great a long time ago, and I'm a big believer of who's on the bus is almost more important than where the bus is going, because it's not going to get there and be productive unless you have the right people on it. So getting the right team in place, all of that are kind of critical elements of what I was brought in to do.
Oh, excellent. And what does the tech stack look like when you joined? Where are you at now? And what do you think it'll look like in a year's time?
What it looked like when I joined was very rudimentary, right? We had Salesforce. I mean, we had grown organically and we'd grown really fast. So a lot of things were done a little bit more sporadically and not with process in mind, right? So the first hire that I made actually was an amazing revenue ops leader who came in and really helped solidify that with some process around everything else that we are doing. So now there's method to the madness, right? So we were doing very well already, but now we know how we're doing, right? Like we can measure better. And I believe you can't really grow unless you can measure, right? Because then you have no way to orchestrate things. So that was the first part. So the tech stack, like what I'm actually trying to do is there's some amazing technology out there. Like Kai, you talked about what you guys do, but I have other folks who are reaching out with some really good sales enablement tools, some great prospecting tools, a lot of AI applications of that. I also believe that too much technology too fast. I've been here 6 months. Too much technology too fast, and you give your reps whiplash. So the first focus was on process. Now we're starting to look at the tooling part of it, right? So obviously Salesforce, we got better at that. We put in we brought in some other ISVs that we're looking at. We're looking at tools for engagement. We're looking at now marketing is the next piece that I'm focused on. So there's going to be a marketing stack that we're going to work on. So that's all evolving today. So I think the journey is very much in its first leg right now. And the last part of the question is, where are we going to be in 5 years' time? Heck, I don't know. I mean, there's new technology that comes out every year that's just so innovative, and I'm like, why did I never think about this, right? Like, and there have been things like we don't use things like Gong today, right? And partly because we're an extremely regulated market, and customers aren't very comfortable having things recorded sometimes. But I've used that in the past. And like when I first did that and I saw that it wasn't just a recording tool, but the coaching element of it was amazing, right? So there are things that are coming out from a tooling perspective that completely revolutionize the tool stack. So constantly evaluating that. Again, my RevOps team is very good at doing that as well. So we're constantly looking at what else is in the horizon and evaluating how it fits into our mix. We also do something very uniquely. Our go-to-market model doesn't lend itself very well to the standard SaaS approach. We're not selling small ticket items. Our tickets are pretty big. And it's generally a very top-down sale. Because I talked about indemnity, right? Indemnity is something the CFO cares about, the C-suite cares about. a VP level person generally in most organizations aren't really tuned to that, right? So the messaging for us has to start at an extremely high level. So it doesn't really, it's not a paint by numbers solution for us. Like when I came in here and I had the conversation with the founders, one of the things we were very clear about is, I've done some things where it could be formulaic. I'll come in and repeat that, rinse and repeat. But you can't here because like I can't, for example, run a really effective SDR play because someone 2 years out of college can't talk about indemnity release, right? So it has to be someone like our sellers are partners from large consulting firms, guys from McKinsey are in our consulting organization. So it's like really sharp people who can evangelize as they're selling, right? So it doesn't lend itself to the whole MQL, SQL, and let's close a deal in 3 months. It doesn't lend itself to that, right? So we have to kind of figure out what's our DNA. What do we need for our DNA? And we kind of trying to evolve into that today.
And so what is your average sales cycle? How long does it normally take to get a customer from soup to nuts?
Yeah, so our average sales cycles, I would say between 6 and 9 months, typically. Some can go a little longer, some are a little shorter. We have records on both ends, right? But I think the happy medium is somewhere around there. And typically it starts somewhere fairly high up, right? And then we get handed off to someone who is more along the delivery lines. So you prove it out there, right? And then there's an ROI that gets built out, and it's part of the proposal that goes out. So it's a fairly long, complex process. But at the end of the day, it becomes such an intrinsic part of their organization and the way they go to market for our customers that it has to be, right? We want them to feel very comfortable about what they're putting in place. We want to give them all the proof points they need before they start engaging with us. And that's the only way we can make sure that they're all happy when once we start performing. And the reality is we have never, in our 5-year history, 5+ year history, we have never churned a production customer, right? So we bring.
You said it out loud now, Ron. That's always the challenge. But no, that's amazing. And are you able to give the audience some idea of volume of customers you're servicing? I mean, I appreciate each deal is quite large, but.
Yeah. So like I said, in the disability space, we have 70+% of the top 20. So we've got and these are all large customers, all brands. I mean, if you look at our website, you'll see a lot of the brands, but these are brands you've heard about. These are global brands. So our aspiration, our ICP is very narrow. So we're never going to have 5,000 customers. That's not our aspiration. We want to have 100 of the best. That's our goal.
Well, achieving unicorn status with 100 customers is fantastic. That would be a great line in the sand.
Well, I'll celebrate that when we get there. We're not there yet, but I do think we're in touching distance.
Very good. And so give us an understanding of what the go-to-market team looks like. You talked us through the tech stack piece, but how many people report up to you, and how's the team structured?
Yeah. So we have the lines divided. It's a little of a matrix model for me in terms of how I have them report. They all report into me, but how they report into me. So I have teams by geography only for outside of the United States, right? So I have folks who are focused on Europe, focused on Australia. In Europe, I have one in the Nordics and UKI, and one focused more on the DACH region. And then Australia ultimately is probably going to be Asia Pacific, but right now it's Australia. And then I also have, and the US is very straightforward, so I've got that originally. And then I have a horizontal, if you will, around product categories. So we have one team that's focused on disability within insurance, the other that's focused on property and casualty within insurance, right? So that's kind of how the sales team is organized. On the revenue, on the marketing, so RevOps is just a function unto itself. So RevOps supports marketing.
Reports directly into you?
Correct, it does. I think, so by the way, that is, I believe, fundamental for the success of any revenue leader is to have a really strong revenue ops function, because otherwise, if you can't measure, you're basically throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. You have no idea what's working and what's not, right? So measurement to me is super important. So RevOps was always, every organization I've been in has been, a very direct part of my team. And then marketing roles in marketing today has, so revenue ops also does customer success operations in general. So it's across the board. very close lines into product and everything else that the company does, because it's one engine at the end of the day. And then on the marketing side, we have field, social, all of that stuff like molded together. We have a fairly lean team in general, but we also have marketing kind of divided in similar lines. We have the US and then international.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Obviously, we've got just over 400 customers using the Ebsta platform, and it's fascinating when we think about change and the impact we have. So we've recently launched our own kind of brand guarantees to try and kind of distill, because what we do is quite complex. But if we try and kind of distill it down, one of the brand guarantees is that we guarantee to increase quota attainment for the reps. And if we don't do it in 6 months, the customer can terminate. So we've never had one terminate yet. So that's one of the brand guarantees. One of them's around kind of forecasting the number accurately. So we'll get your number within 10% of the forecast within 10% of the number. And then the third is that we'll get you live in 30 days. But when we think about those brand guarantees and the customers we're servicing, the reality is to achieve the outcomes, to help to get the reps increasing quota attainment in its simplest form, we kind of need three components. The first is fixing that dirty data, right? So we need to know that the data is consistent, and we can't rely on humans, especially not salespeople, to take responsibility for logging that and keeping that activity kind of consistently logged and the contacts there and so on. So we put the AI engine in place to do all of that. And then we take that data, we turn it into insights. But then the third piece of the puzzle is change. And we're a software business. We don't do change management, right? That's not our world. And so we either find ourselves in a situation where the customer doesn't really have senior RevOps resources. So that's a real challenge. So there's quite a lot of organizations where we find sales ops, kind of sales admins are called RevOps, but they're not really. They're not strategic thinkers. And I think your point is really valid. The RevOps, the right senior RevOps lead, kind of VP of RevOps is a strategic role, and they're long-term thinkers. They're not just working on the next opportunity. And I think it sits alongside VP Sales, VP Success, and VP Marketing.
So Guy, what our experience has been, like when I was recruiting for that role, I said that was the first hire I made, and I hope she'll hear this. She's a phenomenal hire, and we're very proud to have her on the team. But when we were looking for her, we went through a lot of really good candidates, right? And people who had very successful track records. But what I found was at some point in the career, they formulated a strategy that worked for them. And then now all they did was execute the tactics around that strategy. The person we wound up hiring actually came from a very different background. So she was a consultant for a RevOps company, right? So she was going in every couple of months into a new organization and solving a different category of problem for a RevOps leader there or a Rev leader there. So what that allows for is high level thinking, right? So we can throw problems at her that don't fit neatly into a box, and she can formulate around it, right? So kind of what you're talking about, like change management being a big part of it. And like, I have a computer science degree, and or was it maybe even back in high school when I first took computer classes, there was a garbage in, garbage out term, right? GIGO, which still applies. Like, Salesforce in a lot of companies that I've been at, or whatever platform they use for the CRM, is essentially unusable because of the quality of data. And we had that when I started as well. It's like there were deals. I mean, we had things that would sit in a stage forever because nobody dispositioned it, right? Like, and it's very easy for a rep to say like, hey, no decision, but what next? Did we close that down? Do we make a decision to do that? Because that impacts your sales cycle in a certain way, or your measurements in a certain way. Or do we, or do we say that gets punted down by 6 months, which now you have a longer sales cycle on average? So all of those things have to be kind of formulated and thought through, like what's right for our organization. And that's not something that is one size fits all. Like every organization is going to have a different pulse around that. So I think the big part of our success in the last 6 months has been, having that person being able to independently and critically figure out what's the right way to do these for us.
Makes a lot of sense. And again, the insights are still vital, right? We need to know, how many days we spend in stage when we win versus when we lose. We need to understand what the buying committee looks like. We need to understand how much momentum we need with different stakeholders at different stages of the sales cycle to have the best possible outcome. We need to understand what qualification looks like and whether we've done it correctly and whether we kept that going. There's all these data points that are really vital, but ultimately, if you've got no one interpreting them, then that's not getting translated into change for the sales guys on the ground. And we did a big report recently, our B2B benchmark report, where we analysed 4.7 million opportunities. And what's fascinating is that we're now living in a world where only 1 in 5 reps is hitting quota in B2B software sales at the moment, at least.
Yeah.
And the delta between those top performers and the rest of the sales team is getting wider and wider and wider. And all because we find it very difficult to, first of all, the B and C players are getting distracted and they're being trained to do a load of admin instead of being trained to deal with objections.
And
they're not, they don't understand what good looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's another part of that, though, which is the very on-the-ground reality guy. So everything you said is 100% true. But the other thing that I've noticed is the folks who are successful, and by the way, at Aptus/Conga, one of the products we sold was CPQ, configure, price, and quote. So we're selling to sales teams and sales leaders all the time. So, change management, being able to kind of drive behavior in a sales organization, all of that stuff, a thing that I've kind of faced from both ends as a seller into that market, as well as someone who's consuming it. But I think the last part of that, why that gap seems to be getting bigger in my mind also is you wind up trusting people who are successful, and they automatically wind up getting the best opportunities to work on, right? Like if you have $1 million opportunity, are you going to give it to a rep who's never done $1 million deal, or are you going to give it to somebody who's closed 5 of those in the last year, right? So, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So that's where I think tools like, things that you said, the insight part is meaningful for me, right? Like, so the best way I think to scale an organization in a situation like that is like, okay, fine, I'm going to give it to the best rep because I can't, opportunities are worth their weight in gold. I don't want to lose the opportunity to win an opportunity, but how can I use that as a training vehicle for a new rep? Can I do some kind of a split? Because I always say like 100% of 0 is still 0, and 10% of a big number is still a number, right? So can we do a split and incent people to work together? Can we have some way to formulate the behavior where, we wind up by osmosis training more people to be, big number hitters and large achievers and all of that stuff?
Yeah, no, I love that.
That's not something I see happening very often, by the way.
Yeah, I find that's very rare. That's very rare. I mean, we built a business around what we call AI guided selling, which is really just about really getting under the skin of what the top performers are doing at each stage of the sales cycle, and then prompting the B and C players to kind of follow suit when they're at that stage, and most importantly, not allowing them to move stages until they pass the certain criteria. If you're not allowed to leave discovery until you've got buy-in from a specific economic buyer or a particular persona, don't allow them to leave that phase, right? You've got to keep that discipline in place, and that consistency and discipline. Frankly, one of the reasons we always win on that kind of we can increase quota attainment is once you've understood what good looks like, the fact that salespeople want to win is really all you need, because you put it in front of them and you suddenly see the uplift, because it's just that consistency.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think so you talked about Medic or MedPick or whichever, version of that. By the way, I'm a big believer that it's kind of like a, sales methodology to me is very much like a diet. I'm not manic about any one of them. I think any one of them would work as long as you consistently apply them and it becomes a vernacular across your organization. We use Medic, or we use MedPick, which has the paper process also included in there. But when what we wound up doing was tying sales stages to MedPick, right? So we say like, stage 1, like discovery, you need to have A, B, and C from the MedPick definition already. You have to some level of accuracy in extracting that data. And then when you go to stage 2, so on and so forth, we kind of build on that. So by the time you get to a phase where you believe this is going out to contract, you've got all of that stuff covered. You understand, along with the account plan, you have a really good perspective of what's going on in there. You understand the politics. So we have a really clear picture of that organization and its propensity to buy, right? Because ultimately, moving stages is really good. And I've actually had reps who are amazingly good at moving things through stages, but they can't close the deal, or they're really bad at one particular stage, right? Some of them have happy years and they like go from like stage 3 to stage 5, like really fast, but they haven't done all the blocking and tackling that needs to be done in stage 4, right? And I'm just working off a 5-stage plan, whatever yours is. But you'll recognize, if you're a CRO or a revenue leader, you'll recognize the behavior. There's some people who are really good at certain things, but they turn a blind eye to some other things, right? And it doesn't matter if you're really good at discovery, but you're really bad at closing, or if it's the other way around. Ultimately, if you don't do it all well, that's the point you were making. I think about making sure everybody behaves like the top ref, because top reps just know that inherently. It's part of the DNA. They just do it, right? If you're not doing that today, let's put systems around you to force you to do it. You're not going to become an A+ rep, but it can take a C rep to a B+ and a B rep to a A-, right? I think
quickly as well.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. That does seem to work.
No, I buy into that. It was interesting because, again, from all the analysis we've done, we've had customers using all sorts of methodologies. Some I can't even pronounce, but Medic, Spice, Bags, MedPick, and so on. And we haven't seen a change. We haven't seen one over another. In fact, frankly, the simpler, the best, the better, depending on your specific use case. I think, if you're doing complex, then I think MedPick's a great choice. But what we do find is that I think that the stat from the latest numbers, which we released in July, was 68% of opportunities leaving discovery without being qualified correctly. So it's really fascinating to see that kind of, there was a lot of energy spent last year in training people to do this stuff. But then when we look at the way that they're doing the calls, because we're now analyzing the call recordings as well from the discovery, there's a lot of happy ears out there. They're a lovely person, so we'll put them in stage 2 of the sales process. Well, hold on. We're not sure they've got a budget yet, but actually, or who the economic buyer is, but they were really nice. And that's great, but we still need to ask the difficult questions and get them on a plan that allows them to buy correctly.
Yeah, I see that often, right? I also see people identifying people as champions, and I'm like, how are they a champion? I mean, you just met them twice, right? You don't have the phone. So, I agree. I think people tend to jump phases. And I think part of that is our fault as sales leaders, because there's an enormous pressure on sales reps, right? I mean, it probably started with Oracle, with the bottom 20% being shown the door every year, and other organizations like that. But sales reps are always very scared of projecting bad news, right? And I think that's something, as a sales leader, you have to be able to help your reps get out of that mindset. Otherwise, you'll never succeed as an organization, right? That's not to say you let people keep tripping on their toes, right? But you do have to have the intellectual honesty to be able to recognize that not everything is going to close. And that if people are doing the right things and you believe in those right things, you're going to succeed more than you're going to fail, right? And when you do fail, you want to know as soon as possible, because one, forecasting and all of that stuff, but really more importantly, human resources to me is the most expensive part of my of any budget that I put together, right? I can't afford to waste human resources. So I'd rather you not work enough. I'd rather I know that this is never going to close. We don't know the right person, or this is not, they just bought something that's competing with us today and they're not going to touch another decision point for 6 months. Let it be. Come back to it in 6 months' time, right? I don't want updates on this in every week sales call, and then now you're wasting the entire sales calls are super expensive, because typically, I don't know how every organization runs it, but when I run it, I have product in there, I have marketing in there. I mean, there's some senior people in that room, and you're wasting an hour and a half or an hour call. You're wasting 10 minutes of that giving me a status on something that's not got any chance of closing this year, right? So intellectual honesty is super important.
I agree with all of that. I think interestingly, what we saw was that the top performers are closing 30% of their opportunities off at those early stages. And they feel empowered to do that, while the B and C players perhaps don't have enough coverage, they have enough pipeline. So they end up holding on to these deals that end up wasting everybody's time. And that's a real challenge.
The old adage, hope is not a strategy, right? Just because I read this is a big name, I want it, and I hope it closes, is not a good reason to leave it on a pipeline somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So,
one of the other things when we kind of go through, when we onboard a customer, we're comparing all the deals in flight to deals that closed, won, and lost in the past, and we all know that time has a big impact on win rates. But understanding the influence of that time on win rates is really fascinating, because we had one customer, we were able to show them that when the deal split by more than 6 weeks, their win rates were 2%. Right? It was dead. Okay. They had over 120 deals still in flight that were over 6 weeks old.
Wow.
So they were and when you start to show the data to the team, once they understand, I'm not being an ogre, I'm not telling you to close this off because I don't want you to win, but look, your win rate's at 2%, right? Let's get rid of it. Let's focus our energies on something that's more productive. And I think sometimes the sales leadership have got a role to play here in kind of holding people to the wrong data point. Knowing how much coverage each rep needs to hit quota, for example, is a great data point, because you might only need 1.8 coverage to hit quota, but I might need 7x. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I could, our sales manager could like beat you up because you've been closing too much off at these early stages, but you're really laser focused on the good stuff. Well, I've got this massive pipeline, but it's a false security blanket because it's not real.
Yeah. Yeah. Every organization I've gone to, by the way, that's the first thing I wind up doing is doing a pipeline cleanse. And there's always so much of it because you talk to the reps and there's a lot of like, oh, kind of what you said earlier. I spoke to this guy. He's a great guy. He's going to do something. Like, why? What's the need? Like you talked about methodology and, of course there's, when I had a SDR, BDR org, I used Band for them and MedPick for the sellers.
Yeah.
Because, when you get into the sales process, you need a little bit more depth of understanding. But really early on, like even at the discovery phase, if I just understand that they have budget, need, and time, I'm good. Like I generally have a pretty good feel of whether this is going to be real or not, at least. Of course, it depends on how long your sales cycles are and all of that stuff. But
of course, yeah.
That's been a focus for me because I come in and I want to understand what's in the pipeline. And I've walked into organizations where they've told me I've got a 5x coverage, and I look at it and I'm go great. And then I come in and then I go, okay, no, it's not a 5x coverage, right? So that reality check is really important early on as well.
And actually knowing, historically, how much rep coverage do they need to hit quota? And over time, if we're having a positive influence, that number should start coming down. And again, it's a great thing to report on, especially as you join in to go, look, your numbers are dropping down, but actually this rep's numbers seem to be going the wrong way. So what are they doing wrong? And it's another great data point. But look, Ron, I've really enjoyed the conversation. We're running out of time, but thank you so much for joining us today. If our audience want to find out more about you or engage with you directly, how would they go about doing that?
Well, obviously send me an email at through my LinkedIn account, or feel free to reach out at my work email, which is ron.gupta@evolutioniq.com. Love to engage with anyone who is part of your audience, Sky.
Very good. Well, listen, Ron, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. Really helpful. And the audience, I'm sure, will really love it. Thank you so much for your time, and look forward to our paths crossing again very soon.
Likewise, Sky. It's a pleasure. Take care.
Very good. Thanks a lot.